These are your takeaways for the Unit 2 discussion board questions. The first question dealt with a quote from Ambassador Ryan Crocker. Now, Ambassador Crocker served as the U.S. Ambassador to Iraq and also to the U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan during the time that I was serving there as well. And in your text, your authors quote him as saying that Americans tend to want to identify a problem, fix it, and then move on. Sometimes this works. Often it does not. What's needed in dealing with war-torn, hostile, and chaotic regions of the world is a combination of understanding, persistence, and strategic patience to a degree that Americans traditionally have found hard to muster. Now, we do tend to live in a fast food, drive-through culture that expects immediate gratification. But the struggle against terrorism, particularly that committed by Islamic radicals, is very different. It requires a long-term strategy and commitment. That's why I had you deal with the Barbary pirate situation from the 1800s. Not too much has changed except for some of the technological advances that make terror on a mass scale possible, plus the ability to broadcast their terrorist acts like the recent Foley, Sotloff, and Haynes beheadings. But I'm reminded of an old Afghan proverb that I heard while I was over there. It goes something like this: I waited 50 years to seek my revenge, and my only regret is that I acted too quickly. It shows that Muslim mindset of waiting long periods of time to take vengeance on enemies. Now, opportunity reduction, as that espoused in the text, can be accomplished through things like target hardening, risk reduction, and establishing effective guardians. Deterrence comes from a position of strength that includes swift and certain retaliation, something that the Muslim world typically respects. Developmental strategies can take many forms, but ultimately they will find their effectiveness in the building of trust-based relationships based on mutual respect and understanding, just like effective crime fighting. I'm fond of saying that the power for effective change always rests within our relationships. The second question dealt with the point that retaliatory actions on the part of the U.S. and our allies can actually increase the instances of terrorism. The authors make the case that too much of an emphasis on retaliation and deterrence can actually increase the recruitment and the incidence of terrorist acts. Radical Islamists use retaliatory actions by the U.S. and our allies as a rallying point to inflame passions and fuel their recruiting efforts. Think back to how the terrorists often spin U.S. attacks by exaggerating and perhaps even staging civilian casualties. It certainly stands to reason that an overly aggressive approach to counterterrorism can produce additional terrorists in the same way that overly aggressive police strategies can breed resentment on the part of citizens. Counterterrorism requires a balanced approach, just like law enforcement requires a balance between reactive, proactive, and coactive policing strategies. Proactive or police-initiated responses can be compared to water and fertilizer. We know a plant needs water and fertilizer to survive, but too much water and too much fertilizer will poison the plant. In the same way, too much of these aggressive, police-initiated proactivity can poison the relationship between the community and the police, that trust-based relationship that's so essential to our success. The police become viewed as an occupying force rather than a liberating force that's overly aggressive or intrusive. Consider the recent events in Ferguson, Missouri. Now, I'm not in a position to comment on what actually happened there or the rightness or wrongness of the police action at this point. But it would be interesting to me to know the level of trust that the community had with the police force before the shooting incident. Now, a comparison can be made with counterterrorism strategies. Coactive policing balances proactivity by focusing on the power of relationships, trust-based relationships, in the same way that developmental counterterrorism strategies balance an over-reliance on deterrence and retaliation. An overly aggressive posture fuels resentment and gives opportunity for the terrorists to spin any actions of retaliation to their advantage. That's one reason that many people are advocating for a non-interventionist strategy when it comes to foreign affairs. Being too proactive in our approach can lead to resentment, and we've certainly seen this in Afghanistan and Iraq. Arguments can be made that we've overextended our stay and our continued presence simply fuels the fire of radical Islam. But regardless of how we got here, the U.S. and our allies now have to deal very decisively with the threat posed by the Islamic State, this ISIS crisis, so to speak. In developing our strategy, we must take care to strike the right balance between deterrence and development. Now, the last question dealt with the theory of evolution, and I threw this in there specifically because CSU is a Christian-based university. And in defining the evolutionary ecological approach to understanding terrorism and the development of terrorists, the authors reference a view that applies evolutionary thought. Now, there's no question that terrorists are not made overnight, and there's a process attached to their becoming radicalized. But most of you rightly concluded that an understanding of this process does not require a belief in biological macroevolution, a concept held by many, including me, to be in contradiction to Orthodox Christianity. The greatest threat to our homeland security remains the political ideology of radical Islam that seeks to establish a worldwide caliphate that implements Sharia law and convert, kill, or reduce to second-class status any non-Muslims. Winning this war, if we dare to call it that, requires that we know our enemy. As Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, to know your enemy and to know yourself gives you victory in 100 battles. This is why a balanced approach to counterterrorism must include opportunity reduction, deterrence, and developmental strategies. And these strategies, these developmental strategies, are the ones that are targeted at overcoming some of the fundamental issues that fuel radical Islam. Personally, I consider myself to be a creationist, not just because of my faith. I've been convinced by the supportive evidence which I believe to be compelling. But regardless of your own views about evolutionary theory from a biological or Darwinian perspective, the evolution of a terrorist is a different concept. And understanding this process is key to knowing our enemy. Okay, I'm done with that one.